Hi, this is Andy. Let's say you're on the agenda for a meeting that's coming up, right? So the goal is to get buy-in and funding for a project that you'll be assigned to. So this means that some of the most senior leaders in your organization, they're going to be there, right? So let's say it's a couple of days before the meeting. Now it's the morning of. Now you're in the meeting. You're next on the agenda. And now it's your turn to stand up. So what are you feeling right about now? Well, it could be that you're feeling some nerves, and that'd be probably quite normal, right? But the nerves might be driven by this fear of not wanting to make a mistake, right? Because the stakes are high in this big moment. You might just be hoping, don't screw this up. So here's my question. What if there was a way to go into that moment with more confidence? I mean, with this sense that your approach is solid and that you're ready. I'm not saying necessarily stress-free, but what if you had a plan that helped you avoid the top mistakes that often get made in situations like this? Terri Sjodin has been helping leaders around the world do just that. And she's now published a book that makes decades of learning available to you in one guide. Terri joins us today to talk about her new book, Presentation Ready: Improve Your Sales Presentation Outcomes and Avoid the 12 Most Common Mistakes. Though your job title may not have the word sales in it, let's face it, we're all salespeople in many ways. And this book is packed with ideas to help you shine during your next presentation. In today's episode, Terri will talk about the research that drives this book, helping us to understand how the 12 most common mistakes were identified. She'll help us see why we sometimes err by giving an informative presentation when a persuasive one would have been much better, and what the difference is. Terri will share a 6-word phrase you'll want to start using, and I mean a lot. And I think you'll find her research on boring presentations intriguing. We'll talk about all this and more. I can't wait to share the discussion with you. Hey, but first, if you've been listening for a while, you know about our course, AI Made Simple, right? I mean, it's a practical guide to using AI in your everyday work. Reviews keep coming in about how people are finding it helpful. AI Made Simple shows you how to apply today's AI chatbots on day-to-day use cases for us as leaders. It's a rare week that we don't update the course to keep up with the changes that are going on. So if you'd like to learn how to use these tools to accelerate your ability to lead and deliver, AI Made Simple is a great next step. Learn more and join us at ai.peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Thanks. Let's jump into today's discussion with Terri about her new book, Presentation Ready. Terri, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects Podcast.
Hi, Andy. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I've been looking forward to it. So you talk about the importance of a good story in your book and sometimes an origin story. So you also consider yourself a speech geek. So were there any signs that young Terri would be growing up someday to be a speech geek? Any thoughts about that?
Gosh, that's such a great question. Were there signs? Probably. So I was very fortunate to grow up in Fountain Valley, California, which is just kind of like a nice old school community to grow up in. And my mom and dad always said, look, you can do whatever you want to do. You just got to figure out how you're going to pay for that. And so there were things I wanted. And for example, if I wanted to go to Girl Scout camp, I had to pay for a portion of that registration. So I would, intentionally knock on doors of my neighbors and ask if I could wash their car or do odd jobs so that I could put together the cash so I could make my contribution to my portion of the Girl Scout camp registration. Mm-hmm. Later on, if I was selling Girl Scout cookies, you have to knock door to door. And I always wanted to win. I wanted the prize. So I think early on, I knew the value of $1, and I knew that by being proactive in communicating with humans, there was a higher probability I'd get to that goal or that win or that opportunity.
Yeah. And you did speech and debate, I think, too, didn't it? Do you remember that from the book?
Yes. I was very fortunate when I was in high school and in college. I had incredible coaches that really trained myself and some of my dearest friends to this day how to be extremely competitive in speech and debate. And that foundational training really has stayed with me. So I'm a full-blown speech geek, no doubt.
I never did that, but I've talked to friends that did it, and they go, it's intense, but you learn by going through that experience. I'm sure it was great. And you talk about your grandparents and how you had to dress up on Sundays and how you present yourself. I just appreciate how you shared some of the personal side of things too. That was great. And
Thank you.
I think when I think of presentations, I think we often think of that as standing up in front of a room or an audience, and that might be occasionally true, but most of us aren't giving TED Talks right, on a regular basis. So what are some less obvious situations where learning to be presentation ready can help us?
I love that you brought that forward. So there are three types of presentations. There's ceremonial communication, which can be a toast at a wedding or receiving a lifetime achievement award at the Academy Awards. So that's ceremonial, right? Then there's informative talks. That's really intended to be unbiased. It could be a lecture that you might give, or it could be when you're just introducing an idea or a concept. That would be informative. But what most of us do is persuasive communication. We have a desired outcome. You want something to happen as a result of the message. And the audience is really much smaller. On average, a persuasive presentation is delivered one-on-one or small group. There are large group occasions, but for those of us who are selling a product or a service or a cause, a philosophy, or even when you're selling yourself in a job interview or for a promotion, that's not an informative talk. Those are persuasive opportunities. And so the way that we prepare really changes the dynamic. And when you do it right, you have a higher probability you're going to get the outcome you want.
Yeah. Like, I feel like so much of presentation skills training is like how you move. And you actually have some good input on that as well. But most of our meetings, we're sitting down at a table. And so much of this other stuff does apply, but we maybe think about, oh, my gestures right, when we ought to be thinking about, did I prepare right? You know? And so I just think there's so much wisdom in how you even organize the book that you get to that other stuff, but it's not necessarily the lead. Yeah. So I love it when it's research based. And I think that's one of the things that really makes your book stand out. And so could you tell us a little bit of the backstory of how you identified the 12 most common mistakes?
Sure. So I'm going to date myself here, but I started my business, Sjodin Communications, over 30 years ago with one goal in mind, and that was to help people build and deliver more polished and persuasive presentations. So over the years, I created this list of the 9 biggest sales presentation mistakes that people make, and that came out in my very first book that I did called Sales Speak. So 20 years later, fast forward, I felt like it was really time to ask, are these still the 9 mistakes? And has that list grown? And has anything fallen off? And does it matter? So I started with a very simple question, which is, well, does making a sales presentation mistake matter? And then I went to some of my colleagues at San Diego State University, and I partnered with 2 PhDs and a graduate student. And I said, look, let's do a deeper dive research study. And my promise was this: if you're going to teach business and sales professionals or business development professionals how to craft more effective presentations, then there should be no research about us without us, right? It should all come from us. And so the first phase of the study focused on over 2,500 sales professionals who sell a product or service or cause. And we asked them, okay, looking back over the last 6 to 9 months, is there anything that you feel like you did that cost you the win? And 94% of the people said, yeah, if I was honest with myself, I think there was something I did. So we said, thank you for the transparency. Can you tell us what those things were? And ultimately, to fast forward, that's how we crafted this list of the 12 biggest mistakes. We found that the original 9 still applied. There were 3 new mistakes that added to the list. And that if people could have a fast solution to course correct, that then they could make those little tweaks, and then they could ultimately change their, to get more wins, get more deals, get more opportunities. So the fun thing about the original 12 is that it was fantastic. And we released that data in March of 2020. And then it was fabulous for all of 2.5 weeks when the pandemic hit. And then unfortunately, we had to make an immediate pivot. And that pivot forced us to look at virtual presentations. So we did a phase 2 of this study, and that focused very specifically on how the 12 mistakes applied in a virtual or what we would call platforms like Zoom, Teams, Google Meets, whatever. And we found that the same 12 mistakes applied. And then post-pandemic, we had to say, all right, now do these same things happen in-person meetings, virtual meetings, hybrid meetings, and in a post-pandemic environment? So what you get, which is, I know it's a slightly longer answer than normal, what you ultimately get is this multi-year, 3-phase research study that really helps people from a tactical and practical standpoint to understand what the most common mistakes are. And then the book really goes into how do we avoid them. And so that's the full picture.
No, I appreciate you sharing the full picture, because some mistakes are probably timeless because we're humans, but then you know, pandemics and COVID and culture changes, and do they stand the test of time? And I think that not only are those mistakes, but the recommendations you have, I think, can really stand the test of time there as well.
Thank you.
I thought it was interesting that one of the top ones was winging it, and I'd never heard where that word came from or that phrase came from before. So I'd love it if you'd actually tell our listeners about that. And why do you think that winging it is so prevalent?
Yeah. So to your point, there were 3 mistakes that always rose to the top: failing to close the sale, being overly informative versus persuasive, and winging it. And winging it, it really came it comes from the theater. It's when an understudy was in the wings and they may be called upon at the last moment to kind of fill in for an actor who suddenly was no longer able to fulfill their goal. So you still have to be prepared, but maybe that understudy wasn't as prepared as they might have been, because they thought, oh, they're not going to call on me. And then they're like, but if it would be in the wings. Mm-hmm. Fast forward, when people say they're winging it, what they're really doing is they're saying they haven't prepared at all. They're taking a certain amount of knowledge and they're just rolling in hot, doing the best they can at the moment. Right. And that has a lot of disadvantages. And we kind of go into those in the book. But the excuses, to your point, that are tied to winging it are, oh, I wanted to be in a very conversational style. I wanted to be in the moment. And, you would... I think of examples like Meryl Streep, right? Meryl Streep takes a manuscript, she then memorizes it, then she makes it her own. And when she delivers a line, you feel as if it just was authentically rolling off her lips with such ease and flow that, of course, she just said it like she was just in the moment. But that took a lot of preparation. It took a lot of focus and the ability to make narrative her own. And so that's what we're trying to help people to do. Look, I'm not saying you should have everything scripted and memorized, but you should have some very solid talking points that you have previously curated, the beautiful languaging that you want to use to articulate that message in the moment. So it sounds like it's natural, but really you've prepared.
I've got a friend who's a professional speaker, and traditional motivational speaker, I'll say. And he tells me sometimes before he gets on stage, he doesn't know what he's going to say. I'm like, that's insane. Like, I can't even imagine that being the case. But I think most people are not like him in that regard. But I think, does this make sense? Like, I think sometimes I might be tempted, or someone listening to this might be tempted to say, oh, but Terry, I already know what I got. I know this stuff. So I got it right here, And so either we're short on time, or we just think, what could go wrong? Like, we just think we've got it. Is it just we're so busy? Is it that we're overconfident? I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
All of those things are true. Yeah, we're busy. Sometimes we're overconfident. But here's the rub. When you're in a sales role, your responsibility is to be of service to the listener. And so you might know what you want to say, but the brutal part of being a sales professional or somebody who wants to make something happen is you have to take what you know and want in your head, and you have to transition that into the mind of the listener. And they have an agenda. They know what they want to have happen as a result of that conversation. So what we're really doing is using our analytics in the moment. So to that end, yes, there is a piece where you have to be able to extemporaneously respond in the moment, because you're taking what you know and what they want, and you're trying to co-create something that creates a win-win for both parties. We can prepare enough to have some idea of what we think that they will want to hear as a result. You do have to respond in a conversational manner, but your agenda is not their agenda.
Yeah. And you have so many good examples in the book about what the presenter was thinking or thought, and then what the observers were thinking, and how it's not, people can't read our minds. They can't read our intentions. But we can come off as overconfident, or we can come off as you don't understand us. And just a little bit of research sometimes can help. And
I
I
love
grew
that
up.
you honed in on
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
right? Because that speaks to this issue of winging it,
Yeah.
because we think we know what they are going to say.
Right.
And so we come in with this preconceived notion. But when we did the back and forth between what the listener's observations were and what the speaker's observations were, you could see the disconnect.
Crazy.
And that was really a powerful moment, even for us, because I might even think, oh, I thought that person did a pretty good job. And then meanwhile, the listener says, they didn't listen to what I said. They
Right.
didn't respond to my issue. They came in here with their own agenda. And you're like, wow. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
those are really powerful moments that do speak to winging it, but it bleeds into some of the other mistakes that we're probably going to talk about.
Absolutely. I grew up in IT, so informative versus persuasive was an easy trap for me to fall into. And so a model that you share in the book to become more persuasive is Monroe's motivated sequence. So listeners need to get the book to get like the in-depth understanding. And it's worth it. I think it's worth the book, the price
Thank
of the book,
you.
just to understand that. But could you give us at least a high level introduction to the sequence, or at least the parts that you think are most powerful that we just don't think about enough?
Yes. So when you're crafting a persuasive message, what Monroe suggested is that a listener needs to go through 5 simple steps in order to kind of change their mind. I'm really simplifying this, but if you
Yeah,
want to,
yeah.
in a very clean, logical way, change the mind of a listener, get them from whatever their current belief system is into moving forward with you in some capacity, then they need to go through these 5 steps. And we think we know what those are, but really he defines them very differently. So the attention step is really about curating an awakening in the mind of the listener. It's not about having a pithy quote or a statistic.
Funny
It's
joke
about or joke, right?
yeah.
It makes the listener go, oh,
Hmm.
I've heard this before.
I should pay
Or the way
attention.
you're right.
Yeah.
Maybe, it's some things that make them go, It could create curiosity or an awakening, something that pivots their mind and gets them open. They actually don't have to agree or disagree with you in the beginning, but they do have to be curious. So that's the first step in Monroe's motivated sequence. And then it goes into need, satisfaction, visualization, and then action, which, each one of those things, if you take nothing else away from this book, I think the beauty of understanding those 5 steps and incorporating them into your messaging, I think it changes everything. But again, without that core foundation, everything else we're talking about really struggles, because you need that if you want to drive conversion.
Right. Who matters if your gestures were right if you didn't make the ask, or the action wasn't clear, or yeah. The phrase that I just, when I first saw it, I wasn't so sure. I thought, oh. Then the next time I'm like, oh, no, I need to pay more attention to this. The phrase, what this means to you is. So why have you found that to be so powerful?
Yeah. So I feel like I've built my career on those 6 words, right?
Yeah.
So when you work with busy executives, top producers, CEOs, senior leaders, they'll say, and I'll say to them, why should we work with you? Why should we partner with you? Let's work on your messaging. And they'll say, well, Terri, we do this and we do this, we do this, we do this, and we're number 1 at this, and we have the best customer service. And I call that grocery listing. Like, they just give me this giant grocery list. And I'll say, may I push on you a little bit? And they'll say, sure. And I'll say, that is a lovely list, and there's nothing wrong with the list except that it's informative. It's not compelling. In order for it to be compelling, it has to pass what I call the so what test. Like, I'm like, so what? What does that mean to me? So I'm not saying that you can't say those things, but what we talk about in the book in that chapter is you need to be able to immediately use this bridge line, this transition line, which is, we might have great customer service. So think in your mind, so what? And then the bridge line is, and what that means to you is, and whatever you say on the other side of what that means to you is, that's really the nugget, right? That's the gold. That's the piece that's going to make someone go, oh, okay, let's move forward. And you can see how if you're only giving the laundry list or the grocery list or whatever you want to call it, you aren't getting to that compelling nugget. You're just reading them a a list of features and benefits. That doesn't drive conversion. So that is part of the piece. But yes, that's one of everyone's favorite pieces of the book.
It's so good. A client told me that they finally realized that they were opening too many presentations with this is what we do, and it had gone for a while, and they realized this is ridiculous. It's not anchored in the audience, and so they called it the we do, which sounds childish, but it's the stop saying we do this, we do this, we do this, and don't give them the, what you call it, grocery list or laundry list. It's the get to something that's relevant to them. It's the first step of Monroe, right? So yeah, we do. I thought that's funny. So I was utterly fascinated by your findings about the mistake of being boring. So tell us about this gap between how we see our presentations and how observers see them.
Beautiful. So in the research study, we looked at it from two perspectives. Initially, we asked the participants to self-identify what they feel are the most common mistakes that they make. In the second half of the research survey questions, we asked them to put themselves in the seat of the listener and to respond as if a sales professional was presenting to them. What did they see? What did they notice? Because who better to judge salespeople than other salespeople? And ultimately, the list was the same, but the things that they identify as costing that presenter the win, the deal, or the opportunity varied in terms of what was most dominant. So for example, what they self-identified was that they were overly informative versus persuasive. But what they noticed in others is that they were boring. And I think that's hilarious, right? Don't you think it's interesting?
Absolutely.
That I'm informative, but other people are boring. So in speech communication theory, we call that the third person effect, right? Because we don't see ourselves the way other people see us. And our responsibility is to craft presentations that, again, meet the needs of the listener while also simultaneously, hopefully, getting to our goal, our desire, our win. So that was always a fun piece. And then what people perceive as boring was also really an awakening. Again, with the presenter's confession and then what the listener said was it such an ouch. And I think that's one of the funniest parts of the book because it's just filled with all these, things that the listener thinks, which is so different from what the presenter was thinking in that same moment.
Yeah. I download your research and I'll put links so people can do it as well. And it's just one of those things where you can't miss it on the chart, but get that particular gap. But once you start thinking about it, you start thinking of the typical meeting, and it's cliche to even say that most meetings are boring, but of course the answer is it depends. But can you think of just like one thing you'd recommend that if they did this, or at least considered this, it could make their meetings less boring? Is there anything that comes to mind?
So the key is to always focus on what they want, right? So what does the listener want to hear? What did they need to hear? What do they want to say? So, I just ask, I throw it out there like a softball. When I'm meeting with someone, I'll say, look, I know our time together is brief or, narrowed to this, whatever the parameters are. And I'll say, is there anything right up front that you really want to hear about today so that I can make this time together super effective for you? And they're like, yeah. And like, they'll tell you. Yeah. Right. And so, and they appreciate the fact that you've customized it to meet the thing that they, and sometimes it'll throw you. You might like, wow, I did not see that coming. Right. And so what you think the agenda is going to be can often shift based on who's in the room and what's really important to them. Something could have come up that morning that changed everything. And so I like to ask that question, because then they're like, wow, that was time well spent because they focused specifically on what I wanted to hear about or talk about. Again, that doesn't mean you're not going to gracefully pivot the conversation back to where you needed to go, but to acknowledge what they want to hear and then to address it, they lean in. And that's what I look for. I look for those moments as a presenter to when the listener is leaning in, when the listener is grabbing a pen and writing a little nugget down. If I see them smirk, if I see them, I call it when they get sparkly eyes, when they're like, yeah, like that's what I want to hear about. Right. So there's a lot of reading the room. And I think one of the keys to not being boring, this is a full circle moment to this question, is read the room. And have a sensitivity to what they're responding to, and then make sure that you stay in alignment with that.
That's so good. A director level leader told me she had to have a difficult conversation with one of her direct reports. And in the director's mind, this employee would be showing up for virtual meetings looking like they just rolled out of bed. And granted, I feel like, during COVID, one of the most difficult decisions was which pair of sweats to wear today, right? So whether we're showing up in a virtual setting today or even face to face, because sometimes I feel like some of the norms have changed since COVID. So how are you coaching people about this topic of appearance these days?
So thank you for asking. I look at it from two perspectives. So we've all heard the old adage that we should dress for success.
Right.
But I think that that's important for two reasons. One, we know that when you are dressed professionally, when you dress in a way that levels up your performance, it changes the outcome. The best illustration, I think it's in the book, is we talk about the late, great Paul Harvey, the legendary radio talk show host who was known for always wearing a suit and tie to deliver his radio show. And it's not that people could see him. It's, we kind of go into that whole narrative, but the point is that he noticed his performance changed if he wasn't dressed up for game day. And so that's the first nugget, right? Dress for success because you will carry yourself differently. And the second takeaway from that is, I don't think it's about spending a ton of money on a bunch of clothes. I think that what we're doing is we're expressing that we show honor and respect for that listener's time. So I dress to express that I appreciate and I'm grateful for the time that they're sharing with me. Sometimes we hear pushback like, oh, I don't want to spend a bunch of money on clothes, or, nobody dresses up in my business anymore. And I would argue, what is the point? Why wouldn't we? I'm dressed up right now and nobody's going to see us. You're dressed up. You have a collared shirt on.
I've got sweats on underneath.
Oh, do you? I don't. I'm in a proper dress. But I think that here's the nugget. The nugget is, if you dress, even on your virtual calls, as if you were meeting with those individuals in person, then you will carry yourself with that same fluid kind of through line. And that will carry through, across the ethers, if you will.
Yeah. Kind of the guiding principle I've been trying to go on this, I'm just curious your thoughts on this, is don't let the way I show up be a distraction from my competency. So if somebody walks away and go, well, that was a terrible presentation, but man, how did you look? Or if they say anything about how I look, I don't want that to be the thing, right? So overdress or underdress, just don't distract. Is that kind of along the lines? I mean,
I just asked myself, if this was it, like this is the only chance they're going to get to be with you and see you. Yeah. Is this the impression you want to leave?
Yeah, right. There you go. That's good. Right. Is that the impression? That's a good way of saying it. Yeah, I like it. I think we can't avoid talking about nerves, because I think some of the biggest issues sometimes people feel is these nerves. And sometimes it feels, Terri, like the lead up to the event is worse than the event itself. So whether it's the lead up, the days going up to it, or in the first couple of minutes of a presentation, how do you like to coach people regarding anxiety about the presentation?
Well, first of all, I think it's normal. One of the things I tell myself when I'm nervous, and I still get nervous, one of the reasons we all feel nervous in special opportunities is because we know there's a lot riding on the message, and it all lives with you. Like, it comes down to you at the end of the day. So of course that's going to conjure up feelings of nervousness because you're so excited or hopeful about that opportunity. So the very first thing I say is, look, you've done your homework, you're prepared, take a deep breath and see, I visualize a wonderful outcome and think about the alternative to that. If you can get your head in the game saying, okay, I'm prepared, I'm ready for this, it's going to be great, I can see the win. Like, if you say that to yourself, the alternative is, this is going to suck, I'm freaking out, I'm so nervous, they're going to hate me, right? You're going to manifest the outcome you set yourself up for. So I just try to get people get your head in the game. Get your head in the game to win and see a positive outcome. Now, once you've done that, then if you've prepared, your body almost takes over. You get that muscle memory. You wonder how an amazing WNBA player can sink those 3-pointers in a clutch moment, it's not because she's thinking about it, right? It's because she's done so much preparation ahead of time that she's going to sink those baskets with muscle memory. And that's really what you have to kind of get to. You prepare properly so that when you get nervous, your body and your mind are in the moment with you, and it'll take over. It carries you through. Sometimes, have you ever had that moment and you're like, I don't even know what I just said, but apparently it went well.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because it was the muscle memory, right? It just, right. Yeah. Actually, I had that moment just about 10 minutes ago. I'm like, I could have swore I said 25 most common mistakes. Did I say 25 instead of 12? But those sort of things go through our brains. But it's just one of those things of just, I like how you said it. Speak truth to yourself. I found a good process to prepare. I know this stuff. This project is good for our company. Speak truth to yourself, because sometimes I feel like the fear that I would have is based on lies, not necessarily truth. So speak truth to yourself. And the idea of I think 5 years ago, I would have thought, Terri, that's like too woo-woo about visualize and manifest. But Dan McGinn, Harvard Business Review editor, said, decide ahead of time how you're going to feel. And at the time, I didn't understand it, but my daughter asked me to officiate her wedding, and I'm like, I cry at commercials. I'm going to be a babbling idiot. Like this will be terrible. But he's talked about like faders, like high on warmth. This is how I played it. Low on bawling. And there's something about how the body takes over when you decide ahead of time, not perfectly, but it's like faders on an audio board. I believe 100% what you just said about ways to prepare in that regard. Yeah.
And I love that you focused on it, because I too, just like you, I would have initially thought that was too woo-woo, but
yeah.
When I started to look at what do successful athletes do, they see themselves winning. When the coach is giving them that huddle up, they're saying, look at the outcome. We won. They get them in that game. So why wouldn't we take those same principles in sports and athletics and apply them to, our sport, if you will, because sales is a human contact sport. Why wouldn't we use the same application? And I think that it really does help. At least it helps me.
I agree. Yeah. So many things I'd love to talk to you about, but let's end with this. We have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast. Can you think of any ways that parents might try to develop some of these ideas in their children?
Yeah. So I really, if I could make an emotional plea, I want to encourage parents to engage their kids in a public speaking course, get them involved in speech and debate, or maybe even acting at a young age. Teach them the art of the spoken word. And when you do that, you give them permission to use their voice in the future. You don't know how that's going to come out. Sometimes maybe they become a speech and debate geek. So I was never really into the acting thing, but I liked being able to just be myself and learn how to craft, compelling messaging and use my voice to do whatever it is I wanted to do in life. For some people, that might morph into acting, but what you're giving your kids is the understanding that they have a voice. And when they use their eye contact, their body language, the way they construct a message, the way they deliver it with timing, that will generate better results for them than an email or a text message or even a viral video. And I say this in the book, and I thank you for asking. I believe so passionately in the power of the spoken word. None of those ancillary materials that we just talked about will ever replace it. And I know at my core that it's the great equalizer, because when you're doing a beautiful job delivering your message, if you do it with clarity and authenticity and you're humble, you can be heard. It's like it parts the seas. It makes you stand out in a way that makes people say, oh, I want to hear what you have to say. Yeah. And when you can be heard, that's when you create change. So there's nothing more important. And I think because of all this emphasis on technology and AI, we've gotten away from the gift and the power of public speaking and verbal comm skills. So I just want to say, hey, you know what, Andy, thank you so much for dedicating this particular episode to focusing on this particular skill set,
Mm.
because I do think it changes the game for people on so many levels.
I so agree. And for those listening, you have no idea how little we've talked about out of Terri's book. I mean, there's so much more. So if you like practical strategies to help improve your presentation outcomes and avoid common mistakes, get a copy of Terri's new book, Presentation Ready. I put links to the book and the book's website, which also will include the research that you can download in the show notes for this cast. So Terri, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you, Andy.